fee proposals or other issues at the last meeting is because there certainly was not enough time to look at and focus on the regulations and the process, determine new fees, and figure out how we wanted to move forward. So I appreciate everybody being willing to step in to this call. Because it sounds like there's about 100 other people on the line. Please do not put us on hold if you have to do something. Unfortunately, we oftentimes get music in the background when you do that. So if you want to leave the call, hang up the phone, dial back in, or put us on mute, but please do not put us on hold. And if you do, we'll know who you were anyway, because it basically is a commercial for your media outlet or your university. So please don't do that. Provost Workman, have you joined us yet?
I have.
Wonderful, thank you. Then our working group is complete. Again, let me thank all for taking the time to agree to serve. Group, frankly, Provost, I requested you guys. I got a great deal of respect for you, and I believe your input is going to be invaluable in this process. So I very much appreciate your willingness to serve and help us try to craft at least some rules and regulations that, while we provide a great deal of authority and autonomy to the universities, also fulfill our regulatory requirements for the governors and our policy and our oversight issues. And we may differ a bit as far as the depth and extent of involvement, but that's why we have a process. So we can talk more about that as we move through the process. As you know, House Bill 7237 authorized a variety of new things, if you will, from the opportunity to create new fees, universities, fees which by statute cannot incorporate any other service or effort funded through other fees.
Excuse me, Governor Perez. This is Ann Duncan. Is it possible just to maybe just know who's on the phone from do we have all the universities represented at least, or is
we certainly have the working group represented, and I know that FIU is here, UCF is here, the governor's office is here. I would presume on the about 100 phone-ins that I've heard deep in that all the universities are here, but if you like, why don't we just ask and make certain that everyone is here. I know FIU is here, UCF is here, UFFSU, and UNF. If I haven't called your university, if you're here, would you just let us know you're here?
FAU is here.
FAMU is here. We have West Florida, USF, Florida Gulf Coast.
Yeah, Florida Gulf Coast is here.
UWF. Okay, thanks. Sorry for the interruption.
USF, Michael.
Great. That would be the case. And again, let me remind those of you who just came on the call, please do not put us on hold. Just mute us or hang up, one or the other. But as we look at this legislation, it provides various areas for us to come up with some policy and some rulemaking. First, in the new fees section. Second, in the fee increase section. And third, then, in the flexible tuition, block tuition, and market rate tuition categories. So it gives the Board of Governors a great deal of responsibility with regard to creating new fees, impacting student lives, and the universities the opportunity to do some long-term planning and particularly focusing on their flexible tuition policies, perhaps create some market rate type programs. So all of this is important. It's equally important that we look at it with the seriousness that it is, particularly anytime we're talking about increasing or making any changes to student life. I think
Governor Lopez, Norman Tripp, is anybody else hearing that noise? It sounds like a bark.
Governor Tripp, first it's Perez, not Lopez, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I think that noise is people checking into the phone call. So I presume that will stop momentarily.
We must have 5,000 people on this.
Well, this is a very keen topic. It got to media, and I suspect we do have a decent-sized audience. And that's important, because it's an important issue. But as we move forward, the House bill does create some requirements for us, and this will be a time for us to have a dialogue with regard to how we move forward, student involvement and moving forward in that process. And Governor Franklin, I'm going to look to you for some guidance there. And then what we're going to do, flexible tuition, market rate tuition, block tuition, which I think is a much more complicated conversation. Before we move too far in, I want to try to set the date of our next meeting. Tim and I have talked this morning. We're thinking about an August 17th date for a call-in. If you will have your folks check your calendars and let me know if that works, so that by the end of the call we can at least confirm our next call-in and get it noticed and posted.
And you said August 17th. Are you thinking same time or?
Thinking same time on August 17th, either at 10 a.m. or at 9 a.m., just depending upon calendars. But we are not going to get our work done today. I don't think we're prepared to finish the conversation today. But in order to have some proposals for the September board meeting, I think we're going to have to meet one more time. I will tell you my plan of work today, unless we move the ball much farther than I think we will be to come up with something close to workable on the new fees and on increases to existing fees. And then I've got a number of questions and additional information that I'm going to need on the flexible tuition policies. I'm hoping that some on this call may have some additional input or some of the additional data that they could provide the committee, so that we can then work through finalizing that language and that recommendation at the August call, so that by September we can propose a total package to the board. But we'll talk about the flexible tuition piece when we get there. I think that one we need to be very cautious about, and I think there's some homework that still needs to be done, although it may be done by some of the universities, and we'll find that out in a few minutes. By way of overview, that's where I am. Is there anyone on the working group who wants to give some preliminary thoughts before we start talking about the document that was circulated by staff, the points of discussion document?
I guess this is Governor Duncan. I would add, I concur with you that there's one of these issues that's significantly more complex than the others, and that I really like the idea of maybe not necessarily having to tackle everything at the same time and pace.
Well, I mean, I just, as I looked at and mulled, and I've spent much time on the phone with staff and working through and reading, frankly, some suggestions from the University of Florida. Joe, I appreciate you guys weighing in with some thoughts and suggestions. They raise as many questions as they answer for me. So there's a number of issues that I'm going to just want to flesh out, particularly on the flexible tuition piece. But again, we'll get to that once we go through the first two pieces. If no one else has any kind of opening thoughts, I want to just move right into our points of discussion. I think that's the best document to work off of. I presume everyone received those emails, that email from Tim. Everybody have that on the working group?
Yes, sir.
Okay, somehow I feel like the working group has muted us as well, but that's okay.
There's still that noise going on. I guess we have to live with it.
Yeah, that's just people checking into the call, Norm. They just want to hear what you got to say.
Okay.
They're out there.
Be careful what they wish for.
Okay, so as we take a look, staff broke out a points for discussion document, and as we talked, I asked them, and hopefully we're all working off the same sheet, to take a look at some of the recommendations that they heard, some of the ideas and concepts with regard to coming up with a rule or a regulation from the board dealing with new fees, and then to make it clear whether or not the requirement or the regulation came from House Bill 7237 or a staff recommendation. You can see in the at the end of each of those statements, for instance, proposal be submitted in a format designated by the chancellor to include a minimum. Now the staff language is at a minimum, but to include purpose and amount of fee, that is House Bill 7237. I don't think we have an option there. But then the next one, the process used to determine the need for the fee, that is a staff recommendation.
Governor Perez?
Yes.
On that one, I don't know if you want us to comment on each one, but...
I'm sorry, is that Joe?
This is Larry Abel.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And when you jump in, please, at least until I get everybody's voice down, let me know who you are. Yeah, Larry, what I'd like to do is really just have a general dialogue initially, and then we can go through these. I'll tell you kind of my thinking, and then my thinking is absolutely subject to change as we go. But if you want to comment, Larry, please chime in.
Well, when you number 2, I'm assuming, although it's not explicitly stated, that the process will also include how you determined the amount, not just the need, but the amount of the fee.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Larry, and I think that's probably correct. I think if you go down to staff 4, there is student involvement in determining the need and the amount, but I think you're right, and we ought to have that in the process as well for number 2 as we talk through this. But as we look at creating a new fee, and remember we're going to be capped at 10% of tuition on the total of the new fees, there are a couple of the elements that we need to make certain we are eminently aware of. First, that the new fees, by statute, cannot do something that is already being done by existing fees and or differential tuition. So, for instance, if you look at something like an academic enhancement fee, we're going to have to find a mechanism that says either somehow the distinction in that fee is different from what differential tuition is intended to do, or it simply doesn't work as a new fee under this statute.
Technically, that's not
So
correct.
as we consider these fees
I don't think there's
and
anything in there
this
that
process
prevents
of approval, I just want to make sure that we give
the new fee
appropriate
from doing
guidance
the same thing
as to what
as
we're going to be looking
everything
at,
else.
particularly conflicting with or complementing other fees that are already in
You
existence.
just have to consider it.
I think one of the threshold
Consider it,
questions,
but you can't
and Larry, I think
automatically
you
rule it out
hit
because
on
of that.
immediately, is
I
sort
think
of
we
the
had that
process
conversation
and the
with you
board's
before, but it's
involvement
kind of stuck in his
in the
head.
understanding the process of determining the need and amount of the new fee, and frankly, the student involvement in that process. I find it interesting that the statute says the universities will propose a fee, and then a fee committee will be created. As you all know, for activity and service fees, for other fees, 50%, the committee is comprised 50% of students, 50% of university representation for any of those fee increases. And I think one of the threshold questions is, as we come up with new fees, as universities recommend new fees, what is the level of student involvement that will be in the process of coming up with the new fee, as opposed to subsequently appointing a fee committee with half the students? How involved on the front end the students be in that process? Should it be a 50-50 committee, similar to the other fee increases? And I'm curious, I'm an old student body president, so in my world, I want students involved on the front end, but I'm certainly interested in hearing the working group's ideas, particularly Governor Franklin's ideas, with regard to the involvement of students in the creation and amount of new fees, since students will be the ones writing that check.
This is Governor Franklin. There's actually quite a few ways we could tackle that issue in reference to getting students involved on the front end of the creation of the fee. Of course, one thing you can possibly do is always take it to some type of referendum, but in that type of situation, most likely the fee is probably not going to pass. The University of Florida just did a huge referendum to build a new student union, and the students didn't pass that. But another way that would be a more successful process and still have involvement to ensure that the fee is going to positively impact, the quality of the students at the respective universities, is to have them involved with the exploration of it in reference to doing the research and finding out whether or not the fee is needed and is going to benefit their student body. And I would say possibly the same type of committee that is created for the allocation of the fee have students, or 51%, we always try to go for the majority, but either half or 51% of the committee be comprised of students and the other half be comprised of faculty. And of course, you want to make sure the students are appointed by the student body president, and the faculty representatives be appointed by the university president. And then they go and do the research and try to see if, the fee that they're doing research on, debating about, truly is some type of fee that is needed for the students. I think that'd be a great way to get student involvement would be through some type of exploration. A committee that's going to go out and explore and do research and see if they think the fee is truly needed for the student body in the university.
Governor Perez, this is Joe Glover.
Hello, Joe.
How are you this morning?
I'm well. Thank you for your thoughtful input in advance of this meeting.
You're welcome. On this particular issue, it seems to me that the intent and the language of the legislature was fairly clear about the establishment of the committee to review increases in the fee after it's established. I am very much in favor of student input. However, the current policy whereby students often have a major role in determining increases in the fee was explicitly not included in the statute. And I really am hesitant to endorse a proposal to make the initial establishment of a new fee as restrictive as the current process for the increase in a fee.
And Joe, what would your thoughts be with regard to student involvement and determining the need of a new fee or the amount of a new fee? How would you then propose involving students in that process, or would you not propose involving students in that process?
Well, I definitely think that students should be involved in the process and should be consulted in the process. But the determination of the amount of the new fee, there really needs to be, I think it's already in here, that the president and the board of trustees would need to justify the need for the new fee, presumably on some sort of concrete or substantial basis, and as you say, demonstrate that it is not covered by other fees or revenues. And I think there should be consultation, which I think should be left to the President and Board of Trustees, whether they would like to consult with student government, whether they would like to conduct a referendum, whether they consult with focus groups of students. But I think I would like to leave a little bit more flexibility to the President and the Board of Trustees to establish a process of consultation with the students.
Okay.
And this is Governor Franklin as well. In reference to that consultation component, normally when they say consult, that just pretty much means they're going to tell us what's going to go on in a sense. And so the consultation component most likely means there's not going to be much student involvement with the development of the fee.
Other Provost, and Joe, I thank you for your thought there, and I certainly understand the way the language was drafted, but then it was put upon us as the board to develop the additional criteria, and I think that's what we're working through. And I will admit I don't have a predetermined plan here. What I do want to make certain is that students are heard in the process and involved somehow in the process. Larry, Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, this Mark Workman. I would like to concur with Joe. Our student government president, of course, is a member of our board of trustees, and his voice is heard and respected. And when the student government president speaks, he always does so on the basis of his own consultation with his constituency. So the student perspective, I think, is well represented in all conversations pertaining to the university's budget.
Governor Perez, Norman Tripp. It's pretty clear, I think, paragraph J of the statute says, if the Board of Governors approves a university proposal, so to establish a fee, it says A1, a fee committee shall be established. So I think it's pretty clear that they have to establish a committee, but it doesn't come until after the university has made a proposal to us and we approve it.
Well, I think that's exactly right, Norm. I understand the statute calls for that. My question is, does this working group and the Board of Governors, because we're the ones who are supposed to promulgate the rules and regulations of whether we will approve such fees, certainly once the fee is approved, a committee is formed. The question is, as we look at the approval process, as we create from whole cloth a process to approve new fees up to 10% of tuition, how much student involvement do we think needs to be involved in that process? That is our purview. of determining what that process is going to be, or what we will encourage universities to make those processes. And I think it can range anywhere from Governor Franklin's suggestion to Provost Glover's suggestion that, you know what, consult with students, maybe something beyond student body president serving on the board of trustees, consult with students in some way. And I think I want to start that surface conversation here to get a sense of where we line up with regard to student involvement in creating a new fee, proposing a new fee, and the amount. Certainly the statute calls for creation of a fee committee following the fee being approved. The question is, before the fee is approved, when it is thought of and created, what is the level of student involvement there? So that's the
Chico Norman
wanting to have.
Chico Norman Tripp again. As I read this, it's clear proposals come to us from the university boards of trustees, because when you get to item B, 15B, it says a proposal developed pursuant to paragraph A. So I'm just not sure that the legislature didn't give the authority to the boards of trustees to establish these new fees and bring them to us, and I'm uncomfortable if we're going to start saying to the university, you've got to do something different than what the legislature said, and I believe coming from the board of trustees is the proper place. That's just my comment.
Oh, and comment taken, and I just want to be clear. I think if you continue reading in the legislation, it says the board will promulgate rules and regulations, which is the part I'm talking about. Of course, the recommendations got to come from the board of trustees to the board of governors. The question is, what is the process that we want to encourage the boards of trustees to follow to get that fee approval to us? What is important there? Certainly, the legislature has been very clear on where we go once it comes to us from the Board of Trustees. But as we analyze the fee, what is going to be important to us as a board, and do we care whether or not there is student involvement at the creation of the fee or not? That's the conversation. You know, again, it's the old student body president in me that says we at least have to have this conversation before we move forward on how we are going to look at these fees. Otherwise, we can certainly just overlay a template that says, here's the statutory requirements. We're going to do nothing more than required by the legislature, but I think when they gave us the authority to create those rules, they want us to be thoughtful in this process and how those fees are created, and that's why we're having the conversation.
Governor Perez, this is Larry Abel again. A couple of incidents here where one student body committed future student bodies to costs and activities. And I think in both of those cases, had we simply had discussions with students, and I agree with Governor Franklin, sometimes a consultation is just, this is what we're going to do. I hope that doesn't occur frequently, but it is an issue. If it is only going to affect graduate students, then you might want one group of students. If it's only going to affect undergraduates, you might want another. But there is the issue of what the next student government or next student body is going to think about a fee or an activity that impacts them, but not the group that imposed it. So,
Larry, just for sake of the conversation, can you give me an example?
Use of trading the use of Doak Campbell Stadium for rock concerts for student government picking up the cost of the one of the outdoor swimming pools. And the future student body said that was a terrible deal, but they had agreed to it in the past. So that something like that can happen.
Okay. So as you look at the level or degree of participation by students, or at least affected students in the fee, Larry, where is your thought process in the level of consultation? Does it rise to the level of Governor Franklin's 50-50 committee, or the level of consultation, or somewhere in between that we need to try to finesse?
my personal feeling and my experience is that student input is very important. I don't really think students should have 51% of the vote simply because they are in one sense going to be here for 4 years, and many of these decisions are long term. So I think it's important that students are involved on the committee, in fact, but I don't really think they ought to have a majority vote simply because of the nature of a student.
Okay. Nico, Norman Tripp again. Could I ask Larry, when does he think the committee should be established? I think that's the issue. Should you have this process before your Board of Trustees votes on this and sends it to the Board of Governors? I think that's the issue that we're sort of focusing on, isn't it?
Well, so let me sit and try to refine that, Norm. I mean, clearly once the fee committee is established, I believe it's going to have to be, and I'll look to Tim and staff, a fee committee similar to the ones that we use, Criterion Institute and others, where a fee increase have to be approved by a committee comprised the same way that the others are comprised. So the question for me is, if we're going to have a committee of that nature to increase such a fee, should we not have some type of process that requires some reasonable participation, probably somewhere beyond consultation and short of 50-50, to have some student involvement there? And I am willing to say virtually that, and say, tell us the student involvement in determining the need for the fee and the cost of the fee, and then let the universities have some leeway there. But I just want to make certain that we get arms around the level of student involvement that we want to at least encourage of the universities as they come up with these fees. And what sparked it for me was the legislature passed, and the legislation passed, and all of a sudden we had myriad of proposed fees for our last board meeting, and I can't fathom that student involvement was active in each and every one of those fee proposals. So I'm just trying to get arms around how we're going to involve students in that process. So, Larry, if you want to address Norm's issue.
Actually, Governor Perez, like your approach, I believe that students ought to be involved early on. I can't imagine putting a fee out there that students would be affected by without their early involvement. We do focus groups and meet with students all the time, so I think they have to be involved in the process from the get-go.
Well, and I think that if you take a look at paragraph 15B of the legislation, it says that proposals will come in accordance with guidelines established by BOG. Obviously, we're in those guidelines to make some threshold recommendation or create some room in that recommendation. So maybe we take the conversation there for a little bit and see what level of involvement. I want to go back to Joe, because you guys have been engaged in this process. Joe, as you have looked at this and thought through this and commented on it, what level of student involvement on the upfront side do you think is appropriate, workable, so that we can at least meet some thresholds?
Well, I've been sitting here listening to the conversation and trying to strike a balance, if you will, among all the comments. Would in your estimation, Governor Perez, would it be enough for the BOG simply to say that the universities must demonstrate substantial consultation with the students without without actually specifying it or detailing it? Because then, clearly talking to one or two students wouldn't be substantial consultation, but substantial consultation might not, for example, entail taking a vote of the whole student body. It might be, discussions with the elected student body government cabinet or something like that. I don't know, but I'm trying to build some flexibility while at the same time respecting your wish to consult substantially with the students.
Well, and that's certainly where I am, Joe. I do not want student referendums on every fee. I mean, I want to be clear about that. But I want some level of engagement and dialogue. let me go back to Governor Franklin and get some thoughts from you, Gallup. I mean, as you look at this, what are your thoughts of a reasonable level of engagement with students so that we know the student wishes are heard in this process, knowing, of course, that we have a student body president on the Board of Trustees and that his or her vote will certainly be reflective in your or a subsequent student member, the BOG's, comments with regard to approval of these fees. With those two thresholds in place, Gallup, what do you think is a reasonable level of student involvement in the process?
I think that a reasonable level is, like Provost Abel was saying, if there were supposed to be some type of committee, less than the majority or less than 50%, because he did make I'm speaking very, very logically here, but less than 50% to make sure that there is some type of student involvement, that also those students would be able to help facilitate these focus groups and, talk to the students about it. So as it does evolve, there's constant communication with the student body. So once it's implemented, they understand what fee is, they know what it's going to go towards, and they feel much more comfortable about it. And also, if those representatives are in student government, I know Provost Glover, Dr. Glover, was talking about maybe giving the universities the flexibility to say substantial consultation. But I think that's so flexible that I'm not sure how comfortable I would be with just saying substantial. If there is some type of student involvement, it would be awesome for it to be outlined in reference to maybe, just you have to hold a couple of focus groups, or let's say we do implement the committee beforehand to approve the fee. I think, I definitely wouldn't mind supporting something with less than 50% being students, so that there is constant involvement, constant dialogue and debate about the fee, so that the administration kind of gets a different perspective while creating it. At the same time, they can go in together to communicate to the student body and hold focus group sessions. It's very, very important, even politically, to make sure that students are aware of what's going on in reference to tuition, as well as how they're being affected and how that's truly going to increase their quality of education at the respective schools.
Let me ask the Provost, as you have thought about, if you have in fact thought about fee proposals, what kind of process have you had in your head as you look at this, thinking about if you wanted to make a proposal for next fall? Have any of you thought about a process as you come up to determine the need for a fee and the amount of a fee?
Well, having proposed an enhancement fee in this last round of conversations, I can tell you what process we actually employed, and it did involve very extensive conversation with the president of our student government here at UNF.
That would be helpful, Provost Workman. What did you guys do?
Well, essentially that. Our student body president was integral to our conversations about the enhancement fee that we proposed, and was part of that conversation all along the line as we developed that proposal. And the proposal reflected not only our best judgment about essential student needs, but the viewpoint of the student government president and his entire constituency as well. We didn't have a formal committee, but nevertheless, we were inclusive and respectful of student opinion. And, my own inclination, like Provost Glover's, is not to overregulate this, but to count upon the integrity of the process at each institution to make sure that all voices are heard in this conversation.
Yeah, and Provost, to be clear, I'm not seeking to overregulate. I want to make sure that the words we put in here send the appropriate message to, if nothing else, your predecessors or your successors.
Right.
Sorry, that we create this regulation that student, at least conversations and student consultation in this process is going to be integral as the board
Right.
issues. So I just want to make sure we've got the right language in here to express those thoughts. Governor Duncan, you're particularly quiet. even more so.
Governor Perez, this is Larry Abel again. What we did is asked our student body president to assemble 10 students every week to have lunch with the president. And we took notes during those meetings on what students were concerned about, what issues they would like addressed. And from that, and I have to say, it surprised me a little bit, they wanted security extended. That is, they wanted additional police officers and additional safe transport late at night. And they were willing and suggested, they did a cost analysis, the students themselves, and suggested what it would cost to add 5 police officers and 2 more golf carts with people to transport students.
Governor Perez, Norman Tripp again. I wanted to be counter here a little bit because my tendency is always to go harder with the students, and so I really do lean the way you're leaning, Tico. What if we said that our regulation or any proposal would have to show substantial involvement of students and student government in the proposal as it comes to us, without being more specific and just saying substantial involvement, and let the universities come up with their plan, but know that when they present this fee proposal, that it's going to be up to them to convince the Board of Governors that they brought the student involvement to the forefront.
And Norm, that sort of language would be acceptable to me as well. I want to make sure that the universities have at least. I don't want to create a moving target for them. I'm not uncomfortable with just saying, the proposal, the process of determining the fee and the amount of fee reflects substantial involvement of the students. I'm okay with that language. I just wonder if that gives, and I'll put it to the provost, sufficient guidance. I don't want to play hide the ball or moving targets on what substantial involvement is. Let me go back to Joe on that. Joe, how does that language, a substantial involvement threshold, play?
Let me go Norm again before he answers. I'm not an English major, so I'm not hung up on the language.
I get the concept. It's more the sort of nebulousness of it. And again, if universities are comfortable, I'm comfortable saying we want students substantially involved in the process. Let me hear from our provost.
This is Joe Glover. We have not had any discussion to date about the establishment of a new fee, although we anticipate, in light of this statute and the upcoming regulation, that we'll probably engage in a discussion over the course of the next academic year. So all I can do is describe to you the substantial consultation process that we engage in whenever we want to currently increase fees. And typically what happens is that the Vice President for Student Affairs will air the issue with student government and with focus groups. And then, based on that information, she will take it to the official committee, which, of course, as you know, discusses with her and with the President proposed fees and eventually makes a recommendation to the President over them. So the Vice President for Student Affairs, one of her charges really is to remain in touch with the student body and to consult with them and understand their feelings and wishes on a variety of matters, and fees is certainly one of the main ones that she does attend to.
Now, this is Provost Workman again. And I was an English major, Governor Tripp. And I think if our board of trustees is instructed to make certain that there has been substantial consultation with students and student representatives in the determination of any new possible fees, they will interpret that charge, I think, in a manner consistent with the expectations of the Board of Governors. And I think we would be happy to explain what that substantive consultation actually looked like if we came forward with any new fee request.
It is also true at the University of Florida that whenever a fee proposal comes before our Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees always asks explicitly how the students feel about it, and they will turn to the student government trustee and expect him or her to talk about how the students have been consulted and what their opinion is.
Governor Perez, this is Dan Duncan, when you have a moment.
At your leisure, Governor Duncan.
Okay. I guess one other question for Governor Franklin is, I see this big blank board, committee to the board by blank date of each year. Is there something in the timing of this that we can do to make it more, feasible for you to get the right student input and involvement? That doesn't mess up our cycle time?
Let me take back before you answer that. The challenge, by statute, these fees can only take place, they can only commence in fall. That's not our recommendation, that's the legislature's. So the question there is, and Tim left that open for our dialogue, is when the board wants to hear proposals for new fees. And we can, I don't think we beat the student involvement horse to death yet, but you've taken us in a different direction, which is that question drives when the board will hear those fees. If we only want to hear them once a year, at one meeting, if we want to hear them whenever they pop up, knowing that they're only going to be implemented in fall, if we want to wait until after the legislative session each year, as we get a sense of budget allocations, tuition increases, and the like, before we hear the fees, I think that's part of the discussion that we need to have today as well, is when do we as a board want to hear these requests? And for that, certainly the student perspective is important, but I also want to look at the provost and see if it's better for the universities to have a set schedule that says we hear fees in February, or we hear fees after the session, or we'll hear them whenever you bring them, just knowing that they can't take effect until the fall semester.
And Governor Perez, I guess just one other thought on that point, though, is, to me, it would be nice if we had some vehicle where we at least heard about the fees and what was contemplated, and we could share some thoughts on where we stand with them prior to being in that absolute do or die, we're in the crunch, and to get implemented by the fall, we have to pass them, and we don't have time for them to tweak them or respond to our issues or concerns. I guess my personal preference would be that we have some vehicle for that doesn't always put us down to the do it or lose a year.
Point well taken. And I guess that just becomes a part of our board work calendar as to when we hear the initial fee requests. I mean, if we determine that we'll hear initial fee requests at our November meeting for final consideration of those at our January meeting, we can certainly set that, which will then give us some time where we're not up against the clock that we are constantly up against, which is either approve it now or we lose it. I hate that clock, and I agree with you there, Governor Duncan. Let me go to the provost and ask for some guidance there. What creates the most flexibility for universities, and what lets you be able to do your plan of work in the best way?
This is Joe Glover. The one constraint that I will throw into the hopper here is we don't want new fees approved so late that students are surprised by it. So, for example, if you approve a fee in late June, then the incoming freshman class and returning students may not have had appropriate notice of it, and it sometimes comes as a little bit of a shock.
This is Larry Abel, and I would second that. It would really need to be February or March so that we have adequate time to notice the students, and so that we have plenty of time for student involvement.
Interesting. Some of the feedback we had gotten previous was requesting that we wait until after session. I tend to concur with the two of you and Governor Duncan that if we can approve these in February or March, it would give us more opportunities for student involvement in the fall semester, and then announcement of it in the spring semester once it is approved or disapproved. And I'm perfectly comfortable saying we would take a first review, and again, I'll look to the provost, take a first review of these at our November meeting with a final determination either there or at our February or March meeting. I'm happy to take guidance there. I want to make
This is Governor Franklin.
Governor?
Yeah, and I think that it's definitely imperative that, of course, we have more time to review, and the earlier you do it, the better that all parties involved are going to be in reference to implementing a new fee. But also, I think it's important that we don't deal with tuition increases, whether we want to say it or not. A new fee being implemented as a tuition increase at separate times. I think that that will allow some of the governors to not really look at the type of, they were doing differential, and then we're implementing a fee, and then you have all the local fees attached to it. I think when we do all that collectively together, I think that's a very, very important meeting. And whether, I know it's important for us to wait till after the Board of Trustees meet, because we have to decide after what the allocations are going to be from the state government on what type of projection they have on the revenue increases. That's what makes it such a difficult decision to, I guess, do it so early. But I think it's important to do it early. But I think it's also important that we're able to look at differential, the new fee increases, the local fees being increased all together, and to also allow the respective Board of Trustees to have the pleasure of looking at all that as well, so they can actually look at the financial impact of a fiscal year from one to the next.
Governor, that makes some sense, and we've heard that argument. I guess the challenge is we won't do differential till after the legislative session.
Right.
Which would mean all of that would be considered at our June meeting, which I think gives us the challenge that Provost Abel and Provost Glover were talking about, which pushes us back on those fee announcements.
Now, what if we do some preliminary analysis, like you said, something in November? You talked about possibly looking at the fee and looking at the impact of it sometime in November, and then maybe if it's not what we like or something different, we can assess it again. And they can also, in the presentation, talk about, depending on what the state legislature comes back and gives them, also would hopefully dictate the fee implementation as well. Because if we're getting millions and millions of more dollars, I would see the reason why we would need to implement a fee to do the same type of thing. You can use the new money you're getting from the government. But what if we, have some type of preliminary analysis in the fall, in November, like you said before, and then also maybe when they come back to it, they can talk about, depending on that funding from the state legislature, I kind of dictate the cost of that fee or whether or not they will implement it or not. And then now in the final stages in June, we already know what we're going to do, and we either already denied it because they're saying it's nor will do it, or now, depending on what the state legislature says, we actually have the opportunity to say, okay, well, let's go ahead and pass it, because obviously the students in the school need it.
Well, I think that creates a number of challenges for the university, Governor, that I'm not comfortable. I don't want to stretch university fee approval out for an 8-month process. I think they got a plan. And I think, more importantly, the concerns of the provost of communicating the message to the students that those new fees are coming. I think that's, in my mind, that's essential to be able to do during the spring semester. The legislature, if they fund the additional funds for the area the fee is covered, then the fee automatically becomes a challenge, because we can't approve new fees to fund anything that's already being funded by existing fees or differential tuition. So, I think we go outside the scope there. This is more a supplemental fee for a specifically intended purpose that the legislature would likely not fund. I'm not so worried that that is going to happen. It's more a matter of weighing the balance of burden on students and their time to respond. But I'll look to the provost to add color to my response there.
This is Mark Workman. I just have a question. Would it not make sense to try to integrate special fee increases into the work plans that are reviewed by the university boards of trustees and then submitted to the BOG for its consideration?
I think that would certainly make sense, but we still need a separate process for the BOG to approve them. But if you're saying it's when we approve the work plan, approve the fee?
Well, that would be one possibility.
Interesting thought, Jim. Provost.
Governor Perez, this is Larry Abel again. In terms of Governor Franklin's concerns, which I think are very reasonable, I think it is reasonable to assume that at least for some period of time, tuition will probably go up 15%, whether it's done by the legislature or BOG, since no matter how you cut it, we are nowhere near the national average. I think this year will be at 60%, depending on what other universities do. So I think we'll have a good idea. Most universities will, at least, of the tuition increase, and work with the students saying, okay, we've got this amount coming in here. How do you feel about adding anything onto it, and exactly what would that money be used for? And that way we could do it, early, so that students aren't surprised, and students would have plenty of time for discussion.
So moving the ball forward on this, Provost, let me ask you, if we said that we would like a proposal by the November meeting, is that a reasonable amount of time to go through process and create student involvement for next fall, or would we push that back to the February meeting for approval in February and or March?
This is Joe Glover. I think that would be enough time for consultation with students. The one difficulty, I think, might be, depending on Board of Trustees schedules, whether or not you could get a fee officially approved by the Board of Trustees in time to submit to you in November.
So you would think in order to do, obviously this is a year one issue, because after that it becomes moot. You've got a program of work for the full year. But
yes,
you all would lean towards a February type date?
Yes. I think Joe's concern is certainly valid. Plenty of time in the fall for consultation with students, but that would it would be difficult to get board approval within that time frame. So February is more sensible.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you wanted to do a process that the board used for the work plan, whereby it was submitted to the Board of Governors with the preliminary approval of the President and the Chair of the Board of Trustees, and then the full board approved it before the Board of Governors considered it in February, that might work.
Mark, I think I like that suggestion, so that at least, dealing with Governor Duncan's concern, at least the board would have an idea of what will be coming in February. If there were at least a notice from the President and the Chair of the board that said, these are the fees that we're considering, we're in the process, get ready for them coming in February. Tim, how ugly is our program of work in February, and does this overtax the February meeting?
Well, generally, this is Tim, generally we don't have a February meeting. Most of the time we have a January meeting, maybe a conference call in February, and then a March meeting.
So we could arguably either have a February budget committee meeting to review these things, or do this in March.
Yes, you could have a special budget and finance committee meeting by in person or phone call in February, make a recommendation to the board at the March meeting. That's a possibility.
Talk to the working group?
I kind of like that idea.
Storm trip, I'm okay with that.
Same here, Larry Abel.
All right, so we've got some consensus then that we would look for early notice, perhaps in the November meeting, and then I would probably, at least for the first year, we would convene a special budget committee meeting to review fees and make recommendations for their approval or tweaking for the March meeting. Is that what I'm hearing? I would assume that's what I'm hearing. So someone is
Okay.
And I'm sorry, are we then saying, to Governor Gallup's point, that if we do a whole bunch of new fees in July, that we would at least entertain the opportunity to revisit if something different happened in the session?
Well,
Or are we saying it's pass it and that's it, be done?
I think we passed it, Governor Duncan, because these fees have got to be something that aren't funded elsewhere or by other fees or through differential. So, I mean, I suppose if the legislature makes a special allocation to UNF for a green fee or something, it would possibly cancel out the need for that fee. But I don't think that, at least in the near term, the legislature is going to be awash with cash to throw a whole bunch of money at the universities to use as they will.
And I agree. I mean, I think it would just be a good double check to the point, just so that it's still compliant after the actions of the session, you know, that maybe it's a staff thing, and if there is something that would hit that radar, it gets addressed. But it's not a discussion point or item for us, unless that would be the case.
I'm certainly okay with that. I'm sure the university would be okay if it's taken through some special allocation. That it would be a challenge, but I think I would like to have the universities have the ability to make their plans and communicate the new fees after March. I'm fairly confident that unless the earth moves, basically, that they're going to be there and in place.
I agree. I would not want us to have it as an opportunity to revisit the discussion. It would really only be if for some reason it was no longer meeting the statute.
Right.
We gave her 5% for that. But, you know, I have another one from Social Science on my desk.
I'm sorry, are you adding to us?
I want to give 10% to another one of their office managers. It's like
Yeah, could you mute your phone?
playing musical chairs in some ways.
I think that's FSU has their phone on.
Okay. If that's FSU, please mute. Thanks. Okay, so as we've been at this for about a half an hour now, and so far we have a date.
Right, an hour, Governor Press.
Has it been an hour? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's try to move the ball a bit then. I think we've had some of the broader general conversations, which is to say I think we've got a date in place for these proposals to occur, and Tim, I'll look to you to revamp what we talked about into some kind of language. And I think based upon the student involvement conversation, I think we have a sense that we are going to look for substantial consultation with students, with threshold higher than consultation with students in that process, and leave it to the respective universities to make the determination of what substantial is, knowing that we as the board are going to be looking at that process and encouraging substantial, meaning substantial. Are we comfortable with both of those?
Yeah, I am.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's take a quick look then at the other conversation points with those two, well, with certainly the student involvement clarified. We've got the purpose and amount of fee. I'm under A1 of the talking points. The purpose and amount of fee, that one is not going to be optional. That's House Bill 7237. The process used to determine the need for the fee. I think that student involvement component is sufficient there. Do the provost have an objection to just sort of define the process and say, here's why we want the fee? Or maybe it's just the rationale for the fee?
Does that really just mean the need for the fee? Explain the need for the fee?
I think I think that's what it is, Mark. I think it's just
That's Joe.
fee the amount.
This is Larry Abel. I thought that could be the methodology used to determine the amount of the fee or the process. I just wanted to, number two, to be clear that the trustees and the Board of Governors have an understanding of why that particular amount was chosen.
This is Norman Tripp. I'm a little different with you on that. I read it to say that the process concentrate on the word the need for the fee, not the amount of the fee, but the need first of all. And once you get over the hurdle of the need, then you can talk about the amount.
Sure.
You can't even talk about the amount until you establish the need.
Okay. I guess the thing which is a little bit confusing is we thought that in number one, where it says the purpose, that you're really explaining the intent and the need of the fee when you talk about the purpose.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, Joe.
On my trial, the purpose is easy to say, okay? We want to do a fee for this. That's a purpose, okay? Then the second part you got to go to, and here's how the need comes about. And then you've got to establish a true need, okay? And once you get over part 2, then I would say, now you can talk about part 3, which is, here's the amount and why this amount is necessary. But
and I think what Joe was saying is when he read purpose, it wasn't, the purpose is a green fee. The purpose is a green fee because here's what we determined the need for the green fee was. Or am I putting words in your mouth, Joe?
Not clear.
Okay.
Let me bring in another point which may further confuse it, but I think it's germane, and that is number 5 seems duplicative of 1 and 2 in the conversation that we're having. Number 5 says demonstrable student-based need for the fee that is currently not being met through existing university services, etc. Again, that's talking about demonstrate the student-based need for the fee, which again seems to duplicate a little bit points 1 and 2 that we're discussing.
Norman Tripp, I don't think so. I think the university can come up with a plan and the purpose and the need and the plan for the fee, okay, that they feel about it, and then you go to the next part and say, and in addition, the students agree, and here's how they feel about it, and I think it's separate because one, you got the payor, the student paying, and the other one, you've got the institution receiving that money for whatever purposes, they think are necessary.
Let's go back to number 1. When we say the purpose, to me, I read that, and that's statutory language. That is just the overriding, here's what the fee is for, not the reason behind the fee. If the universities were reading that differently to say that the purpose of the fee is to basically do what paragraph 5 says, then I'm comfortable with 1 and 5. And maybe 5 is somewhat duplicative of 2. But I want to make sure, all I want to know as we look at this is what's the fee for, how did you figure out that you needed the fee, how many students are involved, and and is it doing something that other fees are already doing so that it falls outside the scope of the statute?
Governor Perez, can I maybe interject here?
Please do.
It seems like based on some of this discussion, we're kind of mixing up what the process is or the sequence of events the universities would go to versus where I see this is it's all been figured out and this is just how they're submitting it to us. So it seems like maybe we're splitting hairs a little bit. I mean, the purpose has to include, the description, the need. I mean, we're going to have all of it. Maybe it's, it seems like this is not necessarily, as long as we've got the information we want to understand and see, maybe the staff could wordsmith how to make it seem less redundant or clarify it a little further.
Or maybe, and Norman Tripp, I agree with you. Maybe it's the purpose and amount, and then subsection A under that demonstrate. Subsection A would be 5. Subsection 6 would be, listed underneath it. Maybe that's where we need to go. I agree with you, Ann.
Okay. Let me ask this another way. Maybe we move the ball the other way. Of the 10 items under A, and it may be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe 1 is the purpose, and then 2 and 3 become A and B of 1A, which basically says this is what we mean when we say purpose. We'll let staff and Secretary the Provost wordsmith that. On 1 through 10, are there issues in the questions that we put forth, either through the statute, which is not optional, or the staff recommendations? Are there issues there that create angst for universities do you think that all of those questions are questions which we are comfortable answering, we are staying within our scope in requesting?
Well, I would just suggest the only one that gives me a little heartburn, this is Joe Glover, is the word detailed in number 9, where you ask for proposed detailed expenditures. I'm just a little bit concerned about the scope of the word detailed.
Okay.
I have no problem with our proposed expenditures. I'm just a little bit leery of the detailed word.
As far as the level of detail, Joe, or do you just want to say a lump sum was used in this category, or are you averse to saying X was salaries, X was this?
That's fine. That to me is not a detail. I'm concerned that eventually we might be asked to drill down much farther than that.
Gotcha. I think that's probably a reasonable concern. Tim, you guys included that language. Was there a reason, or was that something particular you were going at, or is that just drafting?
It was in response to the requirement that the board has to provide to the legislature and the governor a report at the end of each year on any new fees proposed. And one of the components of that report is detailed expenditures of the revenues generated by the fee. So
what you were passing on is the language that the legislature has imposed upon us.
That's correct, and we would envision the similar type of detail that's provided for the tuition differential, which is salaries and benefits, OPS, expense, and so forth.
Well, Joe, is that you're not uncomfortable providing having language requiring that kind of detail?
No, but isn't that Tim an after the fact report on how we did expend as opposed to upfront when we make the request detailing exactly how we're going to be spending this?
It's an annual report. Well, this is on page 46 of 64, starting on row 1279.
46F, 4F.
Yeah,
I
4F.
think what Joe is saying is, does the detail have to come before or is it after? So that if they propose that it's going to be spent 80-20-10 or 80-10-10 and it doesn't go that way, is to create a problem? Or is it more just an accounting after the fact, and that the detail on the front end could be broader than the reporting requirements, which are subsequent?
I would agree with your interpretation. The detailed is after the fact.
Okay, so if we were to say, leading to Joe's concern, on 9, estimated revenue to be collected and proposed expenditures, the universities are well aware that after the fact they're going to have to provide detailed expenditure reports, but perhaps before the fact they may not be in a position to provide a detailed proposal?
This is Tim. That would be fine with us.
Okay, so Joe, losing the word detailed from there, obviously subsequent, you've got to comply with the same statutes we got to comply with. So the detailed reporting afterwards is not an issue or concern.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, so
Would we be okay to say a proposed budget? Showing the expenditures of the fee? Is that a problem?
Like a projection?
A projection, something.
Yeah, this is Governor Franklin. I would say it's like projected expenditures.
well,
Obviously,
I think that information is certainly called for in other preceding numbers. I mean, as Larry indicated, the amount that we're going to be requesting won't be arbitrary, and the manner in which we arrived at it will reveal largely, I think, the ways in which revenues will be allocated.
Do we have a distinction without a difference? Is there a marked difference between projected expenditures and proposed expenditures? If we just delete detailed, as Joe has suggested, on the proposal side, it'll say estimated revenue to be collected and proposed expenditures for the new fee. Now, I'm not averse to changing
Roman trip. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
and this is Governor Franklin. Like I think it is important you have some type of projection in reference to how the fees can be expended. And hopefully, I'm pretty sure that each university, as they come to the Board of Governors, is going to talk about how they plan on using this new fee. And so in that proposal or that presentation, hopefully they'll also talk about the different expenditures of over the next year, how this fee is going to increase their students' quality of education and where those dollars are going to be spent. So as long as we're not losing that, and I know that we're talking about doing a detail for monitoring purposes to submit to the Senate President, Speaker of the House, and the Governor's office, but also hope we're not losing, like, well, we still want to make sure we know where the money is going. It's not like, hey, this is a new fee, and we kind of think we know we're going to do with the money. This is what we plan on doing with the money.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question I have, and again, I think we're getting in the weeds, is do we care if the word is a proposed expenditure or projected expenditure? I don't care. I'm fine with proposed expenditures. I think we all get the point. But if there's a desire to change it to projected, 6 to 1 half dozen, I think it's a distinction without a difference. Anybody care? Okay. I think if we just delete the word detailed from 9, I think, Provost Glover, that addresses your concern there. Are there any other issues in the 1 to 10? Because I think that
I've made a note, and so I'll ask those questions when they propose them anyway. So, so they'll all know they better come with it anyway, right?
Well, and I think they will all come with it anyway. I mean, I got nothing but confidence in the universities that when they come looking for approval, they're going to know exactly what they want to do with this funds. I don't think there's going to be any hide the ball here.
Joe, remind me I'm supposed to ask those detailed questions.
Okay.
I am confident you'll remember that, Norm.
Now remind you, Governor Tripp. This is Governor Franklin.
Okay.
I'll be right there with you.
So,
I also would point out that in E below, we're required to account for revenue and and the responsibility is very explicit.
right, and that is just tracking the statute as far as what we are required to do, which is consolidate that information and give it to the legislature. Okay, so with those changes and assuming Tim or staff will reorganize the 1, 2, 3 to make it clear that purpose incorporates process and number of students impacted, is everyone fairly okay then with what we've got under at least subpoint A with regard to what we'll be looking for?
I am, Norman Tripp.
Okay. Universities, can you live with that language with the change, deleting detailed on 9?
This is Joe Glover. I can live with it.
Sure. Likewise, Mark Workman.
Okay, terrific. Point B, the aggregate sum of any fees approved by the board. We've got to know that under the House bill, as you can see. Tim, you want to clarify what you mean when you say all other fees shall be based on cost?
In addition to fees that are required or meeting this 10% requirement, a university can set a fee that a student doesn't have to pay at the time they register. Say it's I think FAU, someone was proposing a fee that you would pay for the cost of taking certain tests, law test or study test. So it is based on the cost for those kinds of fees. It's kind of
okay. So,
in other words, you're just saying the university should not profit from fees.
basically, yes.
Okay.
In other words, if in a chemist class, if they got to buy chemicals, they supply them to them at their cost. They don't mark it up 10%.
Correct.
Would that be the same idea?
Yeah, yes, sir.
okay.
Governor Press, I'm sorry, I just got a quick question here. Since we're at 11:15, I've got a hard stop probably at 11:30. I just want to make sure if we're going to wrap up on other future meeting times or anything.
Well, let me assure you that is also my goal. I've got a proposal to be considered on fee increases, and my plan with regard to flexible tuition and market rate and block tuition is to punt to the August meeting with some homework assignments. So I think we've got about 5 more minutes of this one, and I think we can be done by 11:30. That is
Wonderful. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I appreciate it, but that is my work plan as well. Moving through to C, only implemented in the fall term. That's legislative. We don't have much of an option there. D is also legislative, not much of an option there. E gives us the accountability component, again, from the statute, and our only addition there is on the annual report so that then we can compile that data. F, again, constitution of a fee committee once it's established, that is statutory. Decreases in fee, we're delegating to the board of trustees as notification of the chancellor. I can't imagine that's going to create conflict. And board will act upon budget committee recommendations at the next scheduled meeting. Now that may come into a challenge as long as we realize next scheduled meeting is the one right after the next scheduled meeting. Doesn't mean we considered it the budget committee in March and we decided in June. We decided at the March meeting. But I presume that's what we mean there. So are there any other issues or questions, or are we okay asking Tim and staff to move ahead with a cleaner draft of this based upon our conversation, particularly the student involvement component, for us to talk about at our August 17th meeting? Is there anything left on the table, at least with regard to the new fees?
No, not from Larry Abel's perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you for that dialogue. It was long, but I think it was important. Tim, do you have enough to move forward and create a subsequent draft that we can circulate and discuss at our August 17 meeting?
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you.
Okay. Terrific. Let's move on to increases to fees that are currently capped with regard to points of discussion there. These are those fees that are set out in the discussion points, the security access, the orientation fee, admissions, transcripts, that sort of thing. Typically the way we have governed it thus far or recommended it is to delegate these fees to the boards of trustees, and we've got a cap on them. I am perfectly comfortable continuing delegating them to the boards of trustees. The question is, do we need to move our cap? And what is the process once the board of trustees makes the change, for our review of those fee increases? But I don't want to set a system-wide fee for each and every one of these. I want boards of trustees to have the flexibility to change them as they need to. But I do need some kind of oversight, at least as a general policy. So I guess my question, and this is mainly to the universities, are these fees adequate where they are? Does the board need to come in and increase some of these caps on these fees to create more flexibility? Again, I am presuming that all of these fees, and please correct me if I'm wrong, are pass-throughs of actual costs. We're not making any profit on, registration to 0-hour fees or application fees, or I'm presuming that there are some penalty motives on late registration and that sort of thing. But for the most part, a transcript fee is a transcript fee, and we're not making a huge profit. So let me ask again: is there a desire for the board to at least reconsider and create new caps for some of these fees? Because if so, I think we probably need to do that at our next meeting, and then create a process that basically just says, tell us why you did it, and
this is
there. I'm more than happy to give and delegate this to the boards of trustees. I think this is their call on many of these things.
This is Joe Glover. I would suggest that there probably needs to be some flexibility on some of these fees. Let me give you one concrete example to put this in context. The admissions deposit, which we currently have set at $200, when this fee was created, $200 was a lot of money. What we find now is $200 is almost a throwaway for people. And so, oftentimes people will put down the admissions deposit of $200, but they will willingly forfeit it and go off to some other university. And so I think, we and probably the other university in the SUS need to have a conversation about whether this is an appropriate cap for that type of fee. And again, the university makes no profit on it. An admissions deposit simply goes towards the cost of first-year tuition if the student actually arrives on campus.
Right. I too am shocked by not just the admission deposit, how they'll walk away from it, but they'll walk away from a housing and an admission deposit. That's $300, total of $300, as if it was chump change. It is shocking, I think.
And I want to be clear, that impacts your planning, your admissions, the level of students, number of students you admit in your FTEs, right?
Correct. And,
Absolutely.
you can get a balance of 150 students, which is an awful lot. Remember, we're dealing with, at FSU at least, we're going to enroll about 6,300 freshmen. So 150, one way or the other, is a lot of extra classes.
Well, and that's impactful as you plan your FTE budgets as well, certainly. Governor Tripp.
Yeah. Couldn't we just set this so that we dealt with this once a year, and we agreed that all of these fees would come forward, and if anybody wants to make a change, they would know that's the date to make the change and submit, what amount and what cap they want to go to. We review it. Staff reviews it, and we have no problem with it. Once a year, we deal with it.
Well, my thought on this topic is that if there are some of these fees, for instance, what we were just talking about, the admissions deposit, that need to be reviewed with regard to increasing the cap, that we deal with that fairly quickly. And that it once a year, when universities want to make changes to those fees, let us know. I can't imagine that we'll be revisiting caps on a regular basis, but I am not uncomfortable saying, look, we're going to bump up the maximums on these fees, and I would look to the provosts for guidance on those, which ones need to be bumped and moved, make those moves, and then leave that to the universities and the boards of trustees so that on an annual basis we can review those. And again, I'd be fine reviewing those at the March meeting so that folks would have plenty of notice in advance.
I think that would help them business-wise.
I think this is Larry Abel. That would be fine. Do we need all of the material below that, given the discussion that we've just had?
Well, listen, Norman, I think you have to come in with some reason.
Sure.
Because you are going to have people that object to it. Some people are going to say they think it's necessary for them to put 2 or 3 deposits down because they don't know FSU takes them, and they don't know if Florida's going to take them or not. I
certainly think that obviously the statutory requirements that are contained in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are going to have to be met. Larry, I'll look to you, Tim, if we can consolidate based upon the fact that I am perfectly content in relying on the Board of Trustees to consider the 1, 2, 3, and 4 component of this. If we can consolidate that into a more narrative process that sort of tells us, the legislative thresholds, and then sort of an iterative statement as far as here's the process we want to determine the need of the increase. I don't know that we've got to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 it. Maybe Tim, if you could tinker around the edges, just getting an explanation. I am happy to defer to the judgment of the boards of trustees on the needs for these things, as long as they're somewhat explained to us, so that we can make sure that there's not an enormous profit motive involved here.
Yes, sir. This is Tim. I'll be glad to do that. But I'm just a little unclear about the direction this one is going, because the statutory language does talk about the boards of trustees submitting proposals and then the board of governors approving those.
Yeah, no, what I'm looking is the 2-step process. Number one, I would want to take recommendations from the universities with regard to which caps, which currently exist, we need to revisit and move north to the extent that we need to do that. Subsequently, at, I guess, maybe our March meeting, I would be willing on an annual basis to take proposals from the university boards of trustees to increase their fees on an annual basis for these various categories, and what I would want in that proposal will be some kind of an amalgamation of 1, 2, 3, and 4 that you've got sort of explaining why, and then the statutory requirements under 7237 on the increase. So it would be the Board of Trustees still making the recommendations to the Board of Governors, but I don't know that I'm overwhelmingly concerned with the details of that process as much as I am in the new fee process moving forward. I'm willing to defer to the Board of Trustees agree in that piece of the process.
And this is Governor Franklin. I have a comment to make. And I would be actually really interested in looking at having, I guess, different in-state, out-of-state components in reference to, I guess, if a student is going from UF to Florida State or Florida State to FIU, I guess that deposit or that loss of money being a different amount or some type of penalty fee than if a student's going from Florida State to Boston College, leaving the state of Florida. I would be interested in looking at some type of policy that kind of encompasses that as well, where it's not going to be as much of a loss to the student if they decide, hey, I'm going from FIU to Florida State, I'm going from Florida State to FAU, than if I'm going to University of Florida Boston College or Florida Atlantic University to University of Chicago.
Governor Franklin, I would hate to put that on the university to track where the student who didn't show up that day.
This is Norman Tripp. Sitting on a Board of Trustees, you do a lot of planning for all of these people coming in. For example, the deposit, Florida may be fine doing $500, Florida State $500. FAU probably couldn't do that because they want more applications. So I think we need to be flexible. I just think that we look at a cap and we say this is the maximum you could go to, and then let the universities, as they're dealing with their enrollments, on that one issue, deal with it up or down how it fits their business plan.
I think that's been my recommendation, and Governor Franklin, I understand your issue that if you're staying within the system, perhaps it shouldn't be so bad, but I think it will cost the universities the same, whether they go from UF to FSU as if they go from UF to Boston College. UF has planned for that student to be there and not accepted another student in lieu of that. So, I think the cost is the same, and God knows, I'll defer to the provost, but I don't want you guys tracking every student who didn't show up to find out where they went.
No, I don't think we'd want to do that. And I'd also point out that the admissions deposit, the student only has to pay it after the national deadline date when they are supposed to have made all their decisions on which school they're going to attend.
Okay. So, for the sake of time, is everyone comfortable? Provost, if you would give us some idea of which of these fees, if any, need to be adjusted on the upward side so that we move the caps up based upon the realities of today. If we do that on a fairly prompt basis so that then in March of each year you can come with the information requested or a combination of it, and again we'll look to staff and we'll massage something for the August meeting, but basically explaining the whys and the ramifications and the implications of the fees increases, and we do that in March of every year.
So Governor Perez, are you asking for sort of a joint proposal from the provost to increase caps uniformly?
What I'm looking for, though, is I think as a Board of Governors, we need to create a policy that says these are the caps. Now, the universities then can go up to whatever the number is, but I think we ought to have a cap statewide that says this is as high as it can get. You can't charge $2,000 as an admissions deposit. So I think we would simply say, these are your caps. Now, Board of Trustees figure out where you want to be in that range.
Okay, got it.
That's the difference.
So would you like us to consult with one another in the next week or two about where we think we need some greater flexibility and then convey that to Tim, perhaps?
That's what I'm looking for, Mark. If you guys could do that, I'd appreciate it.
Because when they do raise their fee, they would come back and present it to us.
In March, exactly. Then the recommendation is to raise the fee. We'll consider that in March, probably at the same time as whatever new fees are there, so that we can then move forward and advertise those fees and let the students know what's coming at them. Everybody comfortable with that process?
Yeah, then Norman, I just want to make sure that I understand again. We are going to deal with caps, and we'll set those, and then each university, if they want to change their fees, would then apply under a more simplified process, saying, we want to raise it from 25 to 35. We want to go up to the cap.
Yes, and I think the statute requires us to conduct that process, but I want to make it as streamlined as possible side of the fee increase. I think that I would rely in the university board of trustees doing what I know they will do in that process.
Governor Perez, I am sorry, but I'm really going to have to drop here.
Great. Thanks, Governor Duncan. The only point I think we have left is a flexible tuition policy, which I would like to punt to the August meeting, but I do have some homework assignments I'd like to dole out. So,
okay.
If you need to check out, we're looking at August 17th. Does everyone's calendar work for that?
Yes.
Not ideal, but I can make it work. The 18th would be better.
Okay. What does the 18th look like for everyone?
What day is that?
The Wednesday, Norm.
Both days are equally congested for me, so I can make either work.
Okay.
I cannot do the 18th because I have a retreat that whole day.
Okay, well, we need Joe participating, so we'll make it work on the 17th.
Okay, thanks, Governor Duncan. Please feel free to bail out the call.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so August 17th. As we look at flexible tuition, I'm going to leave. I think staff has got sufficient direction. Tim, maybe you and I can circle up afterwards and work through some of this stuff?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ken,
great.
Norman, can you get me a basic outline of block tuition, differential tuition, as it normally is used on a university level?
Well, I think, Norm, that's where we're going now into this flexible tuition policy. I got to tell you, I don't have enough information to have a meaningful conversation on flexible tuition. And perhaps some of the universities who are looking at this topic could give us the benefit of their research before the July 17th meeting, but particularly the block tuition component, how that is used in other states. If we're blocking, say, 12 to 15 hours, I know the desire is to encourage students to graduate more quickly, to take full loads, but, do other states on the 12 to 15 range charge for 12 hours, for 15 hours, or for 13 and a half hours in that process? How is that used? Some examples there. And particularly with the market rate tuitions, I don't have a sense around what we're currently doing in the state with regard to executive MBAs and what we already have out there that are flexible and varying tuitions and market-type policies. I'd like to have somebody provide us with a survey of what exists now in the state and if there are any national trends there so that we can try to have a conversation that sort of was at least a grounding of understanding what we're doing now. Does anyone have that in their portfolios already? Joe, have you guys looked at this, or Larry?
So we certainly have quite a bit of information about MBA tuitions in particular, because of course we try to price our MBA programs that is competitive, and there are many private universities in the market in Florida, Northwestern, Duke, etc., and of course they price their tuition at whatever the market will bear. So we could provide you with some information on MBAs in particular. I'm not sure how much information we have on other types of programs. We could probably also supply you with some information on block tuition. Block tuition is not all that unusual around the United States. There are a number of examples of universities that do have block tuition, typically for credit ranging between 12 and 18 credit hours, they will set a block tuition.
12 to 18. And then, Joe, when they do that, do they charge the 18-hour rate, the 15-hour rate?
12 and 18 averages to 15, which is considered to be a normal load. So typically they will charge a 15 credit hour rate, and students are free to take anywhere between 12 and 18 hours for that 15-hour rate.
Gotcha. And I think that's if we could get some of that data together and out to the working group, I'm just not prepared to have a meaningful conversation on this
Okay.
without getting a little bit more sense of that information.
If you like, maybe Tim could act as a coordinator, and the University of Florida can certainly supply data to Tim, and then FSU and UNF may also wish to supply some additional information, and Tim can help guide us as to what would be most useful for the work group.
I'd be thrilled with that, and I know Tim's got nothing but time on his hands, so I think that'll work.
I am thrilled.
And let me ask you, the universities that are on the line, if you've got existing programs out there, we put a call out about 2 weeks ago, kind of looking for that information. If you've got existing market rate programs out there or other things that you're doing, executive MBAs or the other, please send that information in to Tim so we can get a sense of what we're doing in the state. This is a important topic. It's got a bunch of unintended consequences, and I'd like us to try to get arms around it and probably spend most of the August 17th work group call on these topics. But I think that homework is imperative before we are able to have a conversation on how this is going to work.
So I need that information because I think I'd just be asking a lot of questions that they could answer for me and I could read it myself, you know?
Well, and I think it's important as we try to set some parameters, because I want to create as absolute much flexibility for the universities as we can here, but I want to also understand what it is we're doing and what unintended consequences may occur as a result of what we do. So the more information, the better. Tim, we had talked before the call about what I needed at least. Did I leave anything out there?
No, sir, I think you covered it.
Okay. And it's about a month away, so certainly, Joe, you and perhaps the universities could weigh in, not just on the possible fixed fee increases, but also on this flexible tuition, the data we're talking about before the August meeting, so that we can at least get it out to the committee in 3 weeks?
Yes, we will definitely do that for you, and perhaps as we send out information to you, if it raises questions in your mind, and you can communicate to us back through Tim, we can try to answer some of these questions so that we don't all hit them on the telephone.
Is that your way of telling me not to call you directly?
No, absolutely not. No, call me directly if you'd like to. I'd be happy to talk to you.
I was kidding, Joe.
Governor Perez, this is Ann. I dialed back in from my cell phone and route to my meeting now. But quick question, if I could just add to the list of things I'd like to better understand is a little bit about how this cost, kind of going from a supply and demand equation and our goals with New Florida and the pricing and kind of just a little bit of a better context. To me, this is not just a cost issue. This is how does this fit into the availability of higher education in our state and our citizens. And I guess I think there's some bigger policy issues out there that may enter into this equation, and I just at least want to kind of put that on the table and how that fits with who the intended audiences are for some of these courses, given the lack of state funds that seem to not be available for them.
Okay. I think that's a fair concern, and those were some of the unintended consequences I was contemplating as well, which is simply, I don't want nursing programs to become market rate programs where we start competing with private universities. I think there are some issues that we need to be looking at as far as how, but that's kind of why I want a survey of what's already in existence out there, what's out there, what are we charging, and possibly what else is available in this current market. From some of the privates, which I'm sure someone's got information on, so that we can get a sense of exactly where you're going, Governor Duncan.
Well, and I guess also just on the flip side of, not only how much can we charge, but, is there some floor to charge? Do we really want to encourage someone to come in and undercut the price on the market to kind of buy their share, and what impact that may have on our system as well?
Okay. Point taken. So do we have a sense of what we're hoping to get back as a homework assignment, if you will, before our next meeting?
Well, I think you're looking for a tutorial on block tuition, and you're looking for data and some of the issues surrounding the market rate question.
I would like us to have I'd like to have sort of a little summary to explain to me everything that we talked about in that first paragraph. It says flexible tuition. The university, if we could just have something that says, here's what we're talking about, and explains everything in the first paragraph. You know what I'm saying, Tico?
Yeah, Norm, what you want to know is, when we say flexible tuition policies, what do we mean?
Yeah, what is flexible? What do they mean by it?
Okay.
And what do they mean by graduate block tuition and block tuition differential or market tuition? Just what do they mean by all of that? Then we can have a discussion about whether or not, like where Ann's going, whether we think it's good, et cetera. But I think we need to kind of make sure that what they're talking about, that we understand exactly what it is they're talking about.
Well, maybe
more of a defined terms.
Maybe what I'll undertake to do is, why don't I draft a little white paper on this, and Larry and Mark can edit what I write, and then once the provost will send it off to you, and that will serve as a foundation for the discussion.
That would be wonderful.
That'd be helpful, Joe, and if there's the best practices out there on the block tuition side that you guys know from your literature, that would certainly be helpful as well, particularly on how it's priced and the ranges of hours. Is it a 3-hour range? Is it an 8-hour range? That sort of thing, so that we can sort of get a sense of best practices that are out in the field. I am more than happy to claim ignorance in this area.
Will do.
The question that came up to me is if the university puts in a set price, but they don't make the classes available, does the student get penalized for that? How do we work that? You've got to pay for 15 hours, but if you're, somebody tells you these are the 15-hour courses you need to take, but then they're not available, what happens to the student? Do they get penalized because there's only 12 hours available for them? Those are some of the questions I think I'd like to get comfortable with.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, I think we have more direction there. The August 17th meeting calendar, Tim, you'll notice that. Tim and I will get together after this meeting and get some language circulated on points 1 and points 2 that we talked about, the new fees and the increase of existing fees, for conversation. Hopefully we can adopt those quickly at the August 17th meeting as a recommendation of the Budget Committee, and then we'll spend that phone call hopefully getting to a decision point on flexible tuition policy proposal for the Budget Committee meeting in September. Thanks to all of you for your time. I know this has been a long call and it wandered a bit, but these are tough topics and we just need to make sure we cover them all. To the extent I let the meeting wander, I apologize, but I think they were important topics. I appreciate the Provost weighing in so actively, Joe. I appreciate your work on the front end, and the three of you following up on the back end, particularly on this block tuition, flexible tuition fees. I'll admit it's a little confusing when we've got very little base of knowledge and history. So we're going to try to do the right thing, but we're going to rely on you guys to supply us with some of the data and the working points. And of course, Tim, thanks so much for everything you did in preparation for the meeting. I think the staff work, as always, has been exemplary, and I think we can move the ball at the August 17th meeting and hopefully wrap it up then. Any final thoughts from anyone?
Good meeting, Tico.
Thank you, Tico.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Governor Tico.
We'll continue later in the day.
Okay, thank you.